Hook and call to action. It was 3:42 a.m. on March 2, 1943, and the war was still raging across the Pacific. One woman sat alone in a dimly lit office in Pearl Harbor, her fingers poised over a typewriter that suddenly refused to cooperate. Every second mattered, every keystroke could mean life or death, and she knew, in a way no one else could, that a single misstep or a single mechanical failure could change the course of history. If you think history is set in stone, stay with me, because what happens next will shock you and you'll see how a broken ribbon and a sharp mind toppled empires. Section 1. The ordinary hero. 1,000 to 100 words. Evelyn Monroe had never held a gun in her life. She didn't even own a car. Before the war, she typed letters for a small law firm in San Francisco. Her life a quiet loop of ink-stained fingertips and coffee breaks. But when Pearl Harbor burned, Evelyn's world changed overnight. She volunteered for the Navy's Waves program, not because she wanted glory, but because she understood information, how messages could be a weapon as lethal as a battleship. By 1943, she was stationed at a classified intelligence office near Pearl Harbor, where every telegram, decrypted message, and coded report could shift naval strategy. The office was a mess of typewriters, folding maps, and tension. Officers shouted, clerks ran, and the faint hum of machines created a rhythm that could drive someone insane or, as Evelyn had learned, sharpen their focus to a razor's edge. On that fateful night, she received an urgent dispatch. Intercepts suggested a Japanese fleet was moving through an unpatrolled stretch of the Pacific. The problem? The decrypted message was incomplete, broken into fragments, and Evelyn's typewriter, a vintage Royal Portable, jammed halfway through transcribing the key coordinates. Panic surged through the office. Military officers barked orders, but Evelyn didn't panic. Instead, she did something almost unthinkable. She ripped the ribbon out, carefully rewound it, and improvised a way to continue typing. It was a small, almost absurd gesture, but in that moment, the broken ribbon became the difference between chaos and clarity. Section 2. The ripple effect. 1,000 words. By 4:15 a.m., the fully transcribed message was in the hands of Admiral Chester Ramsey, a fictional commander tasked with patrolling the Central Pacific. He studied the coordinates and realized they outlined a corridor no U.S. fleet was guarding. The Japanese fleet, moving fast, intended to ambush a convoy of supply ships critical to the upcoming New Guinea campaign. Thanks to Evelyn's quick thinking, the information reached Ramsey in time. He ordered a rapid redeployment of destroyers and patrol bombers. Within hours, American forces were positioned to intercept him. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat back at her desk, exhausted, her hands still ink-stained. She had no idea that her small act of mechanical fix in the middle of a tense night was about to save thousands of lives. Section 3. High-stakes confrontation. 1,000 words. The Japanese fleet, composed of 4 carriers and multiple support ships, sailed confidently into what they thought was empty water. Radar and reconnaissance planes spotted them, and an intense naval engagement erupted. Torpedoes screamed across the waves, anti-aircraft guns spat fire, and the Pacific became a violent chessboard of smoke and steel. Admiral Ramsey, acting on Evelyn's corrected intercept, executed a daring flanking maneuver. 2 Japanese carriers were crippled within the first hour. One of the officers later recalled, "It was like the Americans knew exactly where we'd be. It didn't make sense." Back at Pearl Harbor, Evelyn didn't watch the battle. She wasn't allowed in combat zones. Instead, she typed furiously, preparing follow-up reports and coordinating encrypted updates. Each keystroke carried weight heavier than a torpedo. Every misstep could delay reinforcements. COSTING lives. Section 4. Personal cost and heroism. 1,000 words. By mid-morning, news filtered back. 3,000 Allied sailors were alive thanks to the ambush's failure, and 4 Japanese carriers were either sunk or heavily damaged. Evelyn's colleagues celebrated quietly, but she felt hollow. Heroism in a typing pool felt absurd, almost invisible. She thought of her younger brother, stationed in New Guinea, unaware that his supply convoy had been saved in part by her hands. She thought of the soldiers and sailors who risked everything, while she fought her own battle with ink and metal keys. Her emotions were a mix of triumph and guilt. She wanted recognition, yet she feared it would cheapen the lives she had helped protect. Evelyn was an unsung hero, and she knew it, but the Pacific had shifted, irrevocably, thanks to her. Section 5. Twists, betrayals, and revelations. 1,000 words. Just as Evelyn began to relax, a new crisis emerged. One of the decoded messages had been tampered with. Someone inside the office had attempted to feed false coordinates to the admiral. Evelyn realized the office harbored a saboteur, someone willing to risk American lives for espionage. She had to act fast. Using her knowledge of codes and patterns, she traced the alteration, confronting the culprit, a seemingly unremarkable clerk whose resentment toward the Navy had festered into treason. The confrontation was tense. Evelyn held only a typewriter ribbon in her hands, but it became a weapon of intellect and precision, exposing the saboteur before further damage could occur. Her bravery went unrecognized publicly, but it cemented her as the backbone of the intelligence team. Evelyn understood, painfully, that wars were not only fought with guns, they were fought with courage, wit, and persistence. The ordinary hero. It was 3:42 a.m. on March 2, 1943, and the world was still at war. Pearl Harbor's harbor lights flickered faintly through a haze of salt and smoke. The ocean beyond black as ink. Inside a small, cluttered intelligence office, Evelyn Monroe sat hunched over a Royal portable typewriter, the ribbon sticking, clattering keys refusing to respond. Every second counted. Every misstep could cost lives. "Monroe, we need those coordinates now," barked Lieutenant Harris, pacing the room like a predator. His face was pale, eyes sharp, sweat tracing lines down his temple. Officers shuffled papers. Telegraph machines clattered, and the air smelled of ink, coffee, and tension. Evelyn's hands hovered over the keys, not in panic, but in precision. She had trained for this. She had volunteered to type secrets that could kill or save. And in this moment, she understood the weight of every letter she would strike. Before the war, Evelyn had led a quiet life. She had worked in a San Francisco law office, typing legal briefs and letters, her fingers ink-stained from endless documents. She had known routine, predictability, and the small comfort of daily monotony. Then Pearl Harbor exploded, and suddenly she was part of a war she had never imagined. Her world, once measured in paper and ink, now measured lives. The message she faced was incomplete, torn across telegram fragments, scattered by cryptographers' hurried work. It contained enemy movements coordinates indicating a Japanese fleet was traversing a stretch of the Pacific unguarded by American ships. If those movements went unnoticed, hundreds, maybe thousands of lives and critical supplies would vanish beneath waves of fire and steel. Her typewriter, a vintage model she had come to trust, jammed mid-sentence. Keys refused to strike. Panic could have claimed her. Lieutenant Harris shouted again, louder, "We don't have time." Evelyn took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a split second, and made a choice. She ripped the ribbon out, inspected it under the dim light, and rewound it with trembling hands. Her fingers were ink-stained, trembling slightly from caffeine and exhaustion, but precise. She improvised a way to keep typing, threading the ribbon through a second spool, using tape where mechanics failed. The absurdity of it struck her. A tiny strip of black ink could mean the difference between death and survival. Yet, she persisted, with the sort of calm focus forged only in necessity. By 4:03 a.m., the message was complete. Evelyn read it aloud to herself, each coordinate resonating in the silence of the office: latitude, longitude, fleet composition. Then she sprinted across the floor to the communications officer, handing over the fully transcribed dispatch. "Send this immediately. It's urgent," she said. The officer nodded, already relaying the message to Admiral Chester Ramsay, who had command over the Pacific patrols. Evelyn slumped back into her chair, heart pounding. Her hands were blue-black with ink. Her back ached from hours hunched over machines. She didn't watch battles. She didn't wear medals. Her war was fought with patience, intellect, and the hum of machinery. But in that moment, she had become a fulcrum on which the balance of life and death rested. Hours later, American destroyers and reconnaissance planes were dispatched to intercept. The Japanese fleet, composed of 4 carriers and several support ships, sailed unaware of the net closing around them. Within hours, the intelligence Evelyn had typed with painstaking precision would save thousands. Yet, while sailors braced themselves for torpedo fire and flaming skies, Evelyn returned to her desk. More messages awaited. Codes needed translating, reports needed compiling, and every keystroke mattered. In a war where one misstep could mean disaster, Evelyn Monroe became a quiet linchpin, unseen yet indispensable. Her colleagues whispered about her efficiency, noting how she never panicked, never hesitated. But Evelyn didn't care for recognition. She cared for survival, the survival of those who could not sit behind a typewriter, who could not bend ink-stained fingers over keys to guide destiny. She understood, intimately, that war was not only fought on decks, in skies, and across oceans. It was fought here, in the soft clatter of keys, in the careful threading of a broken ribbon, in decisions made in the shadow of danger. By dawn, the first reports of the interception trickled back. Two Japanese carriers had been crippled, one destroyed outright. American forces had successfully protected their convoys. Thousands of lives had been saved, and in a quiet office near Pearl Harbor, Evelyn Monroe leaned back, hands sore, fingers blackened, and finally allowed herself a long, exhausted exhale. She had no medals, no parades, no headlines. Yet the world had shifted because of her small, unglamorous act, and she understood something vital about war, about life, and about humanity. Heroism often hid in the most ordinary places, and the weight of a single individual could ripple across oceans. In that moment, Evelyn made a silent vow she would continue, no matter how small, no matter how invisible, to fight with ink, with intellect, with precision, because in this war, as in life, the smallest actions could change everything. The ripple effect. Before 15 a.m., the typed message Evelyn had fought to complete was in the hands of Admiral Chester Ramsay. He studied the coordinates with a hawk-like intensity, eyes scanning the figures as though they were chess pieces. Every number, every letter, every fragment of information mattered. The corridor outlined by the Japanese fleet's projected path was unpatrolled, a yawning gap in American defenses. A deadly trap awaited the supply convoys heading to New Guinea. Unaware of the storm approaching, Ramsay's hands shook slightly. As he processed the intelligence, "We move now," he barked to his officers. Orders were relayed over crackling radios, through flares of neon light that traced lines across maps and metal. Destroyers accelerated, bombers roared into the sky, and reconnaissance planes sliced the morning mist. Within hours, American forces were closing in on a fleet that believed itself unseen. Meanwhile, Evelyn remained at her desk. She had no idea of the unfolding battle. Her world was still paper and ink, typewriter keys clattering like distant gunfire. Yet, unknowingly, she had become the invisible hand orchestrating a lethal ballet thousands of miles away. Every time she pressed the keys, she imagined the faces of the sailors, the fragile human lives riding on her precision. She wasn't just typing a message, she was threading hope into paper. The first reports came in by 6:30 a.m. A Japanese reconnaissance plane was downed by anti-aircraft fire over open water. American destroyers had already intercepted the fleet's lead column, forcing an abrupt change of course. Ramsay's maneuver worked like clockwork. The Japanese carriers had anticipated open seas, smooth sailing, and unopposed dominance. Instead, they found themselves cornered, flanked by forces they hadn't accounted for, forces guided by a young woman's ink-stained fingers. Thousands of miles away. In the control room of the American fleet, officers exchanged astonished glances. "It's as if they knew where we'd be," muttered Commander Langley, one hand clutching the radio. Every move predicted. It was true. Ramsay had acted on precise intelligence. Intelligence transcribed from torn telegrams, reconstructed by Evelyn with ingenuity and calm under pressure. The Japanese fleet's confidence began to waver. Confusion rippled through the bridge of each carrier as orders crossed in fragmented bursts, delayed by hesitation and uncertainty. Back at Pearl Harbor, Evelyn received a terse update. The report was brief. Enemy fleet intercepted. Engagement underway. She didn't pause. There was no time for self-congratulation. More decrypts needed typing. More messages needed sending. More lives relied on her speed and accuracy. The hum of the typewriter became a drumbeat, each letter a small strike against chaos. By 8 a.m., the engagement had escalated into a cataclysmic clash. Torpedoes screamed across the waves, leaving smoke trails that twisted into the early morning fog. Depth charges rocked the water as Japanese destroyers attempted evasive maneuvers. Bombers screamed overhead, releasing payloads that sent fire and steel into enemy decks. And, hidden in the rhythm of commands, Evelyn's messages continued to guide the American forces with precision. The first Japanese carrier erupted in flames, a towering inferno reflected in the ocean. Sailors on both sides were thrown into chaos. Explosions echoed over the waves, and panic spread like wildfire aboard the enemy vessels. Yet American forces, acting on carefully relayed coordinates, pressed the advantage with clinical efficiency. Within the next hour, a second carrier was crippled, its engines ablaze, its airwing lost to the sea. Evelyn's colleagues were whispering now. Rumors of her role reached Lieutenant Harris, who approached her desk with a rare, cautious smile. "Monroe, you did this," he said softly, almost in disbelief. Evelyn didn't respond. She simply continued typing. Recognition was irrelevant, survival mattered, lives mattered. History, if it even noticed, would remember the chaos she had helped avert. But she didn't need that. By 10 a.m., the Japanese fleet was in full retreat, battered, confused, and vulnerable. American forces had saved over 3,000 Allied sailors from supply convoys that would have been annihilated. Ramsey sent a brief message to headquarters: engagement successful. Enemy carriers neutralized, victory owed to precise intelligence. Behind that terse line lay Evelyn's tireless work, unseen by all but a few in the intelligence office. Evelyn finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. Her hands were sore, her fingers blackened, her mind buzzing with exhaustion. She looked around at the chaos of the office, papers scattered, officers moving in rapid patterns, telegraphs clattering like percussion instruments in a storm. This was war behind the scenes. This was a war fought with intellect, focus, and courage, not bullets or cannons. And yet, a subtle unease lingered. Evelyn had reconstructed the message, saved lives, and directed a naval engagement without leaving her desk. But she had noticed something odd. A fragment of the original telegram had been altered. Almost imperceptibly, she traced the ink markings. With a careful eye, someone had tried to manipulate the intelligence. Someone had tried to feed false information to the fleet. And that someone was still in the office. The thought chilled her more than any torpedo or fireball could. The battle was won. Yes, but the war was far from over. And in that quiet, adrenaline-soaked moment, Evelyn understood something she hadn't yet allowed herself to believe. Her role was only beginning. Every message, every keystroke, every ribbon and spool mattered, because in war, the smallest detail could tip the scales of life and death. And even heroes who never fired a gun could decide the fate of nations.